If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the scariest thing you've woken up to in the middle of the night? I woke up to my mom panicking and locking my door and asking me to call the cops. It was around 3 a.m. and someone was trying to choke her and possibly do worse. She said that she heard someone open her bedroom door and lay on the corner of the bed. She called my name out multiple names thinking it was me, but then someone tried choking her and cutting her with something. She managed to kick them off and ran downstairs into my room to protect me. Once the police came, they did a search outside our home and found nothing. They asked if anyone else lived with us, and we said the only other person that lived with us was a man who rented the downstairs basement, but he was never a problematic person. This man went to church every Sunday and kept to himself. Honestly, he was barely there half the time because he was always working. They decided to speak with him anyways, and they found him in his room masturbating to porn and bleeding heavily because he had accidentally cut himself when my mom kicked him off. Yeah, that shit was scary. After that event, I had horrible sleep paralysis for several nights. I kept dreaming that a black shadow would crawl into bed right next to me and strangle me. The blood-curdling screams of a family friend as he realized he had just killed his girlfriend. I can hear him even now, repeatedly screaming, "I killed her. I fucking killed her," over and over. I remember jolting awake and opening my bedroom door to find him standing there with huge gashes all over his stomach. He's bleeding everywhere, crying, and begging for someone to tell him what to do. My mother stood there trying to calm him down and hold pressure on his wounds and stop his bleeding, but it was really bad. She shoved me back into my room and told me to wait for her, and not knowing what else to do, I did. He cried and screamed in front of my bedroom door for what felt like an hour, but I'm honestly not sure. My mom did eventually come in and explain to me that he had been drunk driving and hit black ice on a turn and flipped his car. They said his girlfriend died instantly, but he wasn't sure that night when he left the scene of the accident and headed to our house. I was told I could never tell anyone what happened that night, and for a long time I didn't, but he did turn himself in and is currently serving life. It is a horrific memory, but I will say that it has always prevented me from driving impaired, and I can appreciate. Probably the time I was sleeping at my deer/hog camp and I woke up and I was staring at some eyes through the window. There was just enough light for me to see the light reflect off of those eyes. The smell, I knew the smell, and it was blood. The smell was like nothing I smelled before or since. I have smelled burning flesh, rotting bodies, meth labs, and nothing smelled like this. So of course I yelled, grabbed my rifle and ran outside, and when I got out there, nothing, no tracks, nothing but the dead silence and 4 dead and eaten dogs. We never heard them bark, and some of the dogs were mean as hell. I have a trained dog that is my general purpose badass. I trained him as a guard dog, retriever, and on hogs. This dog never shakes, but he was under my bed terrified to the point of him pissing/shitting himself. My buddies lost 2 dogs each, and we still to this day don't know what killed them. We even had a necropsy performed, and the vet said whatever it was killed them instantly, and the dogs didn't suffer, and no evidence was found of any other animal that could possibly do this. I sold the camp the next day. My mom went through this really creepy phase where she was basically acting as if she was possessed, not climbing on walls and stuff like that, but she would act super freaky and weird. I had moved out a couple years before, but I decided to spend the weekend at her apartment. Usually my brother is there as well, since I have some really traumatic experiences with her, but he was visiting his girlfriend who lived 3 hours away. Right when I open the door to her apartment, I find her playing with a Ouija board. I just kinda stared at her for a few seconds to process what I was actually seeing, and when it hit me, I literally felt something hit my chest, like physically. I went all ape on her cause I don't mess with that stuff, and I told her I was leaving, but she wanted me to stay. I hadn't seen her in a couple months and I was 15 to 16 at the time, so I decided to stay. That night, we slept on the bunk beds my brother and I shared. I slept on the bottom bunk and my mom on the top. It was around midnight when I woke up to the sound of my mom climbing down from her bunk. I pretended that I was still asleep so that I wouldn't have to confront her or be met with her eyes rolled backwards or something. Yeah, it was bad. If you knew the whole story, this would sound perfectly reasonable. After she climbed down, she just stood there for a good minute. I know, because she didn't make a sound after climbing down. My eyes were closed the whole time, so I never saw what she was actually doing, but I believe she was just standing there, staring at me in the darkness. I was freaking the hell out inside and was on the verge of tears because I was absolutely sure something bad was going to happen. Instead, she slowly walks over to me, ruffles my hair a bit, then goes to the bathroom and climbs back up to bed and goes back to sleep. Needless to say, I did not get a wink of sleep that night. Worst part was that I asked her about it the next day and she said she doesn't remember getting up in the middle of the night at all, and no, she has never sleepwalked in her entire life. This happened a couple years ago but comes up frequently in conversations because of how much it freaked me out. Anyways, I woke up and was like completely awake. I just lay there for a moment confused before I hear a faint sound, like the bass of a song being played in a car far away. I look at my phone and it was 3:30 exactly. I mentally shrug it off and attempt to go back to sleep. Suddenly there is a very loud and prominent drumming sound. Boom, boom, boom. A deep and steady drumming, and I can't figure out where it's coming from. I am now very confused but entirely unconcerned. I then hear someone walking around my house and decide to grab my tiny little pocket knife and investigate. Walking out into the hall, I run right into my mom, who is literally shaking. Apparently she woke up at exactly 3:32 and was upset. We spent the following order freaking the fuck out as we go from window to window trying to find the drumming noise. The sound finally stops and we're like, haha, okay, that was weird, but I'm freaked out and asked to sleep in my mom's room. I was a wimpy 12-year-old. We head back to her room and the drumming sound starts again. This time it sounds like it's right outside the window. My mom goes to the window and the drum sound just fucking starts moving around and sounds like it's in the house. It only lasted a moment after that and was silent after. We haven't heard it since. I jokingly asked my neighbor about it the next day and she said, yeah, I heard it too. I thought you guys were playing drums in your house. Weird that my dogs didn't bark though. Still freaks me out to this day. I camp alone sometimes, and one trip I was more nervous than usual, so I couldn't sleep. The reason I could not sleep was because prior to the trip, I read some camping stories on r/no sleep. To help me sleep, I slipped on some earbuds and put my music on shuffle. It was effective at putting me to sleep. Until 3 a.m., I was abruptly woken up by sounds that I would describe as loud, incoherent, demonic chanting coming from outside my campsite. It sounded like another language, and the rhythm was slow, but repetitive, with no instruments, just sounds of deranged people with a mix of low frequencies and higher frequencies. Very much like how I imagined Satanists would conduct rituals in horror movies. I was so startled that I nearly fell off my hammock from kicking and fidgeting. Moments after, I took off the earbuds. There was complete silence, though my heartbeat was pounding. Turns out my playlist of 500 top rock songs had one corrupted file, making the lyrics and rhythm inexplicably horrific. I couldn't delete the corrupted song, so I switched the playlist and fell asleep again. At 4:30 a.m., more demonic chanting woke me up, this time sounding louder and closer, as if there were people circled around my campsite. I yelped, and ripped the earbuds out of my ears so fast my eardrums almost popped. But the chanting had not stopped. Instead, the chanting slowly diminished in volume until silence again. I looked at my phone, my playlist had already ended, and there was never any music playing for the past hour. I was completely stunned in terror. Listening closely to the surroundings in complete blindness, I heard leaves ruffling periodically, like steps. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped my hammock, took a deep breath, and lunged feet first out of my hammock. I saw nothing but wooden scenery with pitch black darkness a short distance behind the tree bodies, while gray clouds above blocked the moonlight. I was too afraid to shine the flashlight in one spot for too long just in case a face would appear from the black depths of the forest. After this point, I dared not return to sleep. Luckily my fire pit had some hot coals from the night before, so I began to burn some leftover twigs, and quickly made it grow to a well-lit log fire. This was the most terrifying night of my camping career, and until this day, I could never retrieve the corrupted song from my playlist again. And of course, it is the scariest thing I've woken up to in the middle of the night. A group of friends and I were hiking and camping in the winter during our winter break. We shared a group tent, there were only 6 of us. On the last night of the trip, we decided to head to bed early to get extra sleep for the long hike home. Around 3 a.m., I hear a pinging noise, sort of like what you would hear if you threw a BB pellet at a tin roof. It was quick, just 1, 2, 3. I thought nothing of it and figured it was just all inside my head, until 2 other friends quietly asked if anyone else had heard the pinging noise. We decided to wait for a minute, grab our pistols and flashlights, and slowly venture out of the tent to see what was causing the noise. We found a man, stripped of his clothing, dead in front of our campsite, half covered in snow. There were 3 bullet wounds, one to his neck, another to his genitals, and a last to his femur. A friend and I immediately began climbing to find a spot with service. Night hiking in snow is horrible, don't do it, and called 911. Roughly 45 minutes later, an EMT helicopter arrived and picked up the body, while a squad of forest rangers combed the woods immediately surrounding us. The body was never identified and is now buried in an unmarked grave near my hometown, where I was attending school. I'm not well versed on pistols and silencers, but I can only assume the pings we heard were the rounds fired. Camping in the state woods/game lands, so not a campground with neighbors and shit, just a clearing in the woods with a spot to park about a football field away. Just me, my best friend, both females, and the dog. It's our second night there, and the first night we'd heard plenty of drunken guys off-roading well after dark. I'm woken by my BFF whispering, "Did you hear that?" I listen, silence. Then her again, he said, "Be quiet." Or something to the effect. It's been a couple years, now I'm on high alert. I'm sleeping next to a loaded weapon, so I reach for it slowly and quietly, trying to hear whatever it is she heard without alerting it/him/them, and terrified at the idea of possibly needing to use it. Then her again, but it's mush. So I whisper back, "What?" She responds with actual words this time, but it's utter nonsense. That's when it dawned on me that the dog, who'd been quite protective out in the wilderness, was still sleeping peacefully. And that's when I learned, after 20 years of friendship, that my best friend talks in her fucking sleep. Late to the party and not the middle of the night, but this legit fucked me up. Taking a nap with my 3-year-old son at about 4 in the afternoon 7 years ago. Dead asleep, I feel my arm violently yanked from my side and kinda thrown behind me. At the same time I hear "Wake up," yelled in a strange man's deep voice. I was so startled and all like, what the fuck? I was dazed and freaked out, but my son was still sound asleep beside me. So I figured it must be a weird sleep paralysis spell and got up for the rest of the day. I thought about this often and it just didn't sit right. A year later, my sisters, my fiancé, and I are all sitting around having a drink talking about weird things that have happened to us. I mentioned this scenario and how I think it was my sleep paralysis or something, but it was still a really bizarre experience. I turn and look at my fiancé. His face is as white as a sheet and he had literal tears in his eyes. He said he distinctly remembered that day. He was sitting in our living room and he heard a man yell, "Wake up," loudly and forcefully. He really thought some random weirdo got in our house and searched around for him and didn't find anyone. He was such a skeptic and does not believe in anything like ghosts. He said that encounter seriously has him questioning things now. This might not be what Op is looking for, but this happened to me. I don't expect anybody to believe me because I know how crazy this is going to sound. When I was home from college during summer break, I experienced a night terror. That's at least how I rationalized it in my head anyway. It happened a few times starting in the summer after my freshman year. It still happens to me sometimes, but very rarely, once in a year or less, and never as bad as the first time. My parents lived in a trailer, so there wasn't much room. I shared a bedroom with my younger brother and we had a bunk bed. The top bunk was mine. I had a dream that I still can't recall what it was exactly about, but I know it was just a dream, not a nightmare. I was laughing in my sleep, and even as I was waking up, there was no light on in the room, and it was probably 3 a.m. or so. Little to no light was coming in from outside either. Anyway, as I woke up and started to open my eyes, I rolled from my side to my back. Above me, just at the ceiling, was a black mass. It was like a cloud or smoke, but it didn't go anywhere and there was form to it. There was a body, or more like just a torso, with no legs or arms and a head with bright yellow eyes. They had no pupil or iris. They were like energy. I stared at its eyes and could feel myself start to cry without making a sound. I stared at it and it made just a slight movement of its head. It moved its head down to me just a little closer and its eyes flared like a pulse of light. Like it wanted me to understand that it was really there and not just in my head. At that point I finally felt able to move and I kicked at it and screamed. My parents came in my bedroom and said I was curled into a ball and looked like I was convulsing. They shook me awake and I was fine. When I kicked at the thing, I ended up knocking the lamp out of the wall. I hate telling this because I know how it sounds. My hands are getting all twitchy thinking about it again. You can believe it or not, it changes nothing. I know what I saw and I wish I could forget it. Woke up to a man standing over my bed with a knife. Not kidding. He and his group of people? Either way, 3 or 4 men total broke into our home in the middle of the night. One went upstairs and swiped my mom's laptop, phone, purse. The second and third were going to work on our living room area, trying to unplug gaming consoles and other accessories to the big screen TV, and the last came down our hallway and must have been tasked to see if any of the rooms had anything. So he was in my room, and was, I think, reaching over my bed to grab my wallet and car keys. One of his group also came in and flicked my bedroom lights on and boom. Woke up to staring down someone who could have easily murdered me right then and there. Instead, he dropped my wallet and keys, they both took off running, and only the first one got away with anything, which he ditched out in the street after I got through the pure shock to call the cops. To this day, I feel anxiety if I sleep somewhere that the door is not locked. It was brutal. About 12:30 one night I got up to go pee. My room was right beside the bathroom, so it was like 2 steps away from my room. I was walking towards the door of my room at a normal speed, pretty slow since I was sleepy, but when I opened the door everything suddenly went incredibly slow, like I was walking underwater. Try to walk underwater and you will understand what I mean. For what seemed like an eternity later I opened the bathroom door and turned on the light. Now everything moved incredibly fast, like someone put on fast forward on me. I closed the door and sat down on the bathroom floor and held my hands to my head as I silently screamed to myself, what is going on with me? It felt like I was seriously going insane. I heard the bathroom door open and I looked up. I swear saw myself standing in the doorframe looking down at me. I blinked and suddenly I was gone. I quickly got up and peed and stormed back to my room. I checked the clock and now it blinked 01:46. I was in that bathroom for an hour and 15 minutes. Fast forward 1 or 2 weeks, I got up one night about 1:30 to go pee again. As I walked towards the door I heard a silent scream saying, what is going on with me? And I quickly opened the door to find myself sitting on the floor with my hands to my head. I blinked once and I was gone. Next day I tried telling this to my mom and dad and of course they didn't believe me. I have night terrors. Basically your worst nightmares trigger an almost conscious type reaction. One morning I woke up extremely tired and had a vague recollection of having a dream about bugs and not being able to speak. That morning, my roommate makes a comment that I had a busy night. I am confused and ask what the hell is he talking about? He goes to tell me he came home at 1 a.m. and found me running around the house waving my arms, flailing them around like they were on fire. I was also only wearing underwear. He asked me if I was okay and every time I tried to speak I was struck dumb. My mouth would move but no sounds would come out. I would then shake my head in frustration and kept on shaking my arms like I was trying to brush something off. Eventually, I went to bed. Freaked him out. Freaked me out no being able to remember this. So from what I can gather, I fell asleep on my arm. It went to sleep, my mind made up a scenario where bugs were eating my arms. Fucked up. This now happens 1 a month and my wife has to talk me down and get me to wake up. Sometimes the dreams are so visually real that it takes 5 to 10 minutes for me to realize it is just a dream. 2 people trying to break into my apartment. It was approximately 2 a.m. and I heard them talking at my door. I never sleep and when I do I can hear a fly fart and wake up. I looked through my peephole and at first a wave of fear came over me. As I watched them I realized they were not the brightest people in the world and thought I'd be an easy person to rob, which led me to believe they had been watching me. After a couple of minutes I decided enough was enough and I went and got my gun. Guess they didn't watch me close enough to realize I had a few guns in the apartment. I went straight to the door and opened it, sticking the 9mm directly to the face of one of the men. No joke, the other guy took off leaving his buddy at my door with a gun to his head. I explained that I had zero reservations about killing anyone that cared so little about me that they were willing to steal what I had worked so hard to purchase. I allowed the guy to leave and I never saw either one of those 2 guys again. I like to think that the one guy went and found his friend and kicked his ass for leaving him at my doorstep lol. Hell who knows, maybe the whole ordeal made them change their life. In truth, I'm just happy that we didn't end up with a much worse outcome. Had I shot either of them, I'd no doubt be charged since they never actually entered my apartment. About 3 years ago I was in the midst of writing a book about fairies. I was intensely researching about dimensional beings. I was also reading up on scientific research like that of Rick Strassman and Graham Hancock. While writing it seemed sometimes like the words just flowed out of me and onto the page. When I went back to read previous pages, I felt as if someone else wrote it. I had been up late after everyone else was in bed and continued writing until I got this strange sense that someone else was in the room with me. I figured I should just go to bed. I was awoken in bed with my daughter screaming a blood-curdling scream. As a mother you get accustomed to different cries of your children. You can tell by the pitch and volume etc. what sort of thing may have occurred. Like if my child was pissed off and crying it would be different than if they hurt themselves and were crying. Obviously different cries result in different reaction times by the parent. This is in my experience and this was the scream of a child experiencing something terrifying. The only other time I have heard this type of scream from one of my children was when one received a corneal abrasion and he screamed in pain for 2 days despite medication to help. My screaming child was situated between me and my husband. She was 1 at the time. I shot up in the bed and she was screaming and pointing at the wall behind me. I couldn't get her to look at me, But the horror on her face made me turn to look at the wall. There was a large opening in the wall. What the motherfuck? I grabbed my daughter and literally jumped over my husband to get out of the bed. There was no longer anything on the wall when I looked back at it. My daughter calmed down at that time and I felt as though hypnagogia had gotten the best of me. It however frightened me so badly that I have yet to return to finish writing the book. The book was a twist in the story of how fairies steal babies and replace them with their own. I felt strongly I had tapped into something and was in over my head. On another note, my husband awoke to the commotion and was a bit out of it as usual after being woken up. I was too afraid to say anything about the hole in the wall. I later recounted the story to him. Recounting this now and the experience is still so real in my mind. It was very frightening. Okay, I'm a little late and it's a little long, but this is like the craziest shit I've ever experienced in my life. I was 13 at the time, and 2 nights before waking up to crazy shit was the night I had one of my school friends spend the night. We were playing in my basement, which was already hella creepy. The floor was hard cement and was painted a deep red color, and the brick walls were sloppily painted white. There was one hole in the wall by the washer that had this oozy looking stuff that had hardened and had just become a part of the wall. I still have no idea what the hell that shit was. My friend and I were sitting down there in the middle of the room, with one of those pull string light bulbs glowing in the corner. We sat with my Ouija board between us, and we were just fucking around. I'm pretty sure I was moving the planchette and shit I don't remember. As a kid I was pretty into dark, paranormal stuff, but I didn't take it seriously. Anyways, my friend went home the next day and all was normal, until the following night. I was probably watching King of the Hill on my box TV in my room past my bedtime, but when I finally fell asleep it didn't last long. I woke up around 3:30 to 4 o'clock on a school day to the sound of an animal screaming in my room. At the time I could have sworn it was a donkey. I immediately ran downstairs full fucking speed into my parents' room yelling, asking if they heard any fucking donkeys screaming. They didn't. I asked them if I could sleep in their room that night, but they said no, so I slept in the guest room which was next to theirs. I'm of course up all fucking night thinking the more scared you get, the more negative energy you attract, and I bet it was witching hour, which of course kept me up even longer. I'm thinking, we live in the city and there isn't a single donkey within miles of my house, let alone inside my room. That shit was loud. I still don't really have a logical explanation as to what happened that night. My bedroom is on the street side on a hill in San Francisco. I recently moved here from elsewhere in the city. It's quiet here, but I can hear much of the city's activity nearby, especially sirens echoing around. One night within the first month of moving in, I woke up around 1:30 a.m. on a Thursday or Friday. I didn't go out that night, to the sounds of what could only be dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of people screaming. There are a fair number of popular bars and clubs nearby, and I sat up on the edge of my bed trying to figure out whether the screams were raucous or frightened in nature. But they faded pretty quickly after I sat up. I'm sure now it was just sirens going nearby. When they echo off all the hills they can sound quite monstrous, but I wasn't used to hearing them yet, and they got put into a dream as people screaming, but it took me a while to fall back asleep that night. I checked into the news and Twitter both that night and the following morning just to be sure, never found anything. My bedroom overlooks the patio in the backyard. At night it gets super dark because there's a lot of trees and dense foliage, and it's also very secluded as it isn't easy to get into the backyard because of the foliage along the sides of the house. I have a back door in the kitchen which, inexplicably, has a doorbell which was installed by some previous owner. It makes no sense to be there because no solicitor or package carrier would attempt or even think to go in their backyard. Anyway, it was a literal dark and stormy night, so I had a hard time falling asleep, but once the weather calmed down I did doze off. Sometime later, around 2 or 3 a.m., I was roused by the doorbell. I barely woke up, thinking I dreamt it, or if anything it was kids doing a ring and run, but then remembered, my front doorbell has a uniquely different sound than the back door, and this was not the front door. So I drifted off assuming I dreamt it. But then, 10 minutes later, I heard it again, this time clear as, well, a bell. My mind started racing. Dare I peer through the curtains to look at the back door? What would I see? I was in full panic mode. Then, another minute or two later, and another single thing. I called the cops. They said they'd send a car around, and eventually the front door bell rang and I got a phone call letting me know an officer was at the front door. I let him in, and he said he'd walk the perimeter. He didn't find anything, and even he said he can't see anyone getting back there to play a prank because it was such a pain navigating to the backyard. I never did find out who or what rang the back door bell, but to this day I wonder, is it better that I don't know? My young son and his friend woke me up 5 years ago whispering there's someone in the house. They were semi-pacing from my bed to the doorway and my son had a metal pipe in his hand. I knew they were serious, but it still took my brain a second or two to fathom it. "Mom, there's a man in the house and he was in our room," my son stressed after I didn't immediately jump up. Well, that got me up. They tell me he's downstairs. I tell them to stay upstairs as I slowly descend. I get to the bottom step and see a scruffy old man sitting on my couch looking back at me as though he was half surprised, yet half now it's on. I asked, "Why are you in my house?" To which he replied, "I'm looking for Ted, my neighbor." A bit panicked I shouted, "Get out of my house." Now here's where I determine this guy is definitely a serious threat to us, instead of just a confused man. He, by actions, refused to move off my couch. Not only that, but he became clearly angry at me for being upset with him. I turned to go back upstairs and nearly run into my son and his friend, with metal pipe at the ready. I have to admit, it felt good knowing they didn't let me confront this guy alone. Anyway, I call the police. Scruffy guy stays put until the police are outside, then he goes out to greet them. Cops must have known him because they talked me out of pressing charges. They said he's from a halfway house a few blocks away and had an argument with someone there, so he left. Cops claim he's just confused. About a week later I read in the newspaper that when they returned the man to the halfway house he stabbed the woman, who was his caregiver. The argument that had was over him wanting to leave and her refusing his request, per the law. So yay, this guy had a freaking knife on him when he broke into my home. I didn't wake up to in the night, but the morning was quite a ride. So me and my wife booked a cottage next to an old southern plantation home to stay in for a weekend getaway. No history of the place being haunted and was really not creepy at all. On the way up to the place we did the usual romantic stuff and bought some wine and chocolate, the real fancy kind with 2 levels in the box. Checked into the place late that evening, around 8 I recall. Staff was nice and old, no bad vibes, folks were real quaint and chill. Go to cabin and watch some TV and drink some wine. I ate 2 pieces of chocolate, my wife at 3. Keep that count cause this is when things got weird. Go to bed, not drunk or blackout sleep, like legit hey I'm tired and driving sucks let's go to bed. I awake the next morning and my wife asked me to go get her jacket out of the car as she forgot it and was cold. I go to put my shoes on and can feel something in my shoe. I take it off and shake it out and nothing comes out of the shoe. Attempt to reapply shoe to foot and still feel said foreign object. I take the sole out of my shoe and there are 3 pieces of chocolate chillin'. I immediately look at my wife who is still half asleep and ask her why the hell would you put chocolate in my shoe? She is a super heavy sleeper and tells me she doesn't know WTF I'm talking about and looks over in disbelief. So I walk into the living room and see the box of chocolates sitting in the same spot on the coffee table untouched from how I remember them sitting there. I open the box and on the top row sure enough only 5 pieces missing. However, upon removing the top row I discover the entire bottom is gone jack. Like not a piece in this. I immediately start freaking out because 2 things cross my mind. Something or someone was in here last night, while I was dead ass asleep, and took a whole row of candy. My wife comes into the room to look with me and claims that I'm overreacting and it must be a mouse. I told her that it was the neatest mouse I have ever seen since it was kind enough to repackage the box, save 3 pieces for my fat ass, and put my shoe back in a decent manner. I immediately check all doors and windows to find that they are in fact locked and show no sign of forced entry or being broken. Car is fine and untouched, and nature is relatively peaceful. I went to the front desk and asked if guests ever had complaints about weird things or if people saw stuff, but they reassured me this wasn't a touristy spot for paranormal stuff and they never had complaints of that nature. To this day not sure WTF happened or how. While the ghost idea is pretty creepy, it was 10 times scarier to think some fuck was in the cottage while we were dead asleep and planting candy in my shoe. Not a native English speaker. This happened just the other day. To start off, I don't see faces of people in dreams, just a shape and the idea of the person. I know who it is, or who it is supposed to be without looking at them. The dream was kinda amazing at first. It started with me driving my car to a parking lot to play a VR kinda game while I was parked. The game was a bit like Elite Dangerous meets X3, Albion Prelude. For those who doesn't know, it's sci-fi space simulation games. Throughout the dream I'm coming back to the same parking lot to play the game, and I am having a blast. My wife sleeps with a blanket covering her in the back seat while I'm just playing my VR game in the driver's seat. I can't see her face, I just know it is her. So to the creepy part. While I'm playing the game, the screen goes black, and my eyes see 2 gray blobs where I try to focus. I take the VR headset off, and I'm back in the car. I look out the window on my left and catch a reflection of a person coming up on the driver's side. I lock the doors of the car with the central button, and take of the handbrake and puts the car into gear without starting the car, manual. The person is now standing right outside my door and stares directly at me. I can see every detail of his face. He is Japanese, sunken in black eyes, in his 50s. His face used to have more fat on it, but now his skin is kinda hanging off his cheeks. The hair is salt and peppery, and he has a 10-day blotchy beard and mustache going on. While I stare into his eyes, he yanks the door handle, not changing his expression at all. I begin to panic, start the car, and drive out the parking lot in reverse while the Japanese man sprints after the car with the same neutral face staring at me. I wake up with a pounding heart and was freaking out little. I can still see his face in my mind, and it's the only face I've ever seen in a dream. Also, I have never seen this man before. I'm a white Norwegian guy in his 30s. When I was a child, I woke up in the middle of night to face our huge-ass window that basically made up the entire horizontal line of the room. In front of my face was a gray-skinned creature that looked like an elf from Harry Potter. It was really creepy as fuck with my face inches from his, and him staring at me with giant eyes while his hands were on the window. I woke up my grandmother, who was sleeping right next to me at the time, and pointed at the creature, telling her there's a creature there. She just stared for a while, told me to go to sleep, and I did. Honestly, I would have just pegged it for a dream, but everything felt so real. The next day though, instead of me approaching my grandma, she was the one who asked me if I was okay, and that if I was still afraid of the gray creature. The weirdest thing was that I didn't describe jack shit when I pointed it to her in the middle of the night. To this day, I still believe that creepy fucker is real. At the very least, I'm pretty sure that I wasn't the only one who saw it. I went on a coastal sailing expedition in Baja, Mexico, and each night we just slept out on the beach near our landing. We had ground tarps and sleeping bags, but the B in Baja stands for bugs. I saw tarantulas, scorpions, and a whole lot of bees and wasps. One night I spilled a few drops of honey on my sleeping mat and woke up to find a happy trail of ants that efficiently removed said honey without disturbing me, so that was pretty cool and gave me better respect for the little guys. Naturally, I was still concerned that I'd wake up finding some critter in my bag with me, but after the first week I resigned to the fact that if it happens, it happens. It's amazing how quickly one can adapt to new realities. It's not that I didn't care if I woke up with some new multi-legged friend in bed with me, but I recognized that there was nothing I could do about it. Sleep is important. So one night I find a spot, dig a small dip in the sand for my spine and settle in. Sleep soon overtakes me. I awake hours later in the dead of night, too tired to actually inspect the noises I hear. It sounds like a group of other crew running about the campsite. I get more peeved than anything that people would still be up with all of the work we have to do at 5 a.m. They were all a bit younger than me for the most part, and so I try to ignore them and get back to making Z's. Time dilates as I drift between sleep and these sounds that continue. Finally, I've had enough of whoever is up. I check my watch and it's 3 a.m. This is bullshit. I unzip my bag and look. It's dark, but the sky has the barest light. Standing maybe 5 feet away from me is a massive black horse. I freeze. As I stare at it, it boffily turns its head, red eyes in its sockets. The creature towers over me, breathing heavy, and rubs its hoof into the sand. The thought of this beast trampling my tiny body plays into my head. And for a long moment we simply look at each other. Without thinking, I simply turn away, lay back down and wait. I think to myself, please don't step on me. And eventually I fall back asleep. The next day nobody believes me. I swear the thing was out of Lord of the Rings. I know a horse is not a bug, but of all the things I expected to wake up next to, a demon horse was not on that list. I used to sleepwalk when I was young. I also had quite some nightmares, so obviously those two didn't mix well. One night, in my nightmare, I was suddenly all alone in a void. Just pure black nothingness. My instincts kicked in and told me to just run, and so I did. I kept running for hours, in dream time, until I was so tired, I gave up and collapsed on the floor. Then I looked up and saw a tiny window of light. It seemed like the exit of a survival game, so I started climbing towards it. After what felt like hours, I finally managed to reach the window, and because I was exhausted, I sat on it to rest for a while. After a breather, I finally looked left to see what exactly was out there. Now my bed was right by the wall and window, and my window was just like half a meter above my mattress, but I always slept with the windows closed. When I looked out of the window in my nightmare, I woke up and found myself actually hanging out of my window, with half of my body dangling out. Luckily I fell back into my room and not the other way round. Less than a month ago I heard some noise outside my room. Sounded like my brother had gotten home late and walked into something. A couple more bumpings into shit as I'm half asleep and my door opens. Some dude that I've never seen before pokes his head in. Says yo, and disappears. Fully awake I think fuck me, I do not want to go out there, but double fuck me I have a lot of expensive shit in that room. I'm like 125 pounds. I get up and check it out, he's already gone. Windows open. Some random asshole grabbed a neighbor's outdoor chair, stood on it and crawled in through an unlocked window. At first we thought he didn't even take anything. I have an expensive PC in the room with the window, and had cash lying on the desk, but ultimately I think he just couldn't find the light for that room. He'd rummaged through my brother's shit and took his wallet, lost nothing important, just had to get new cards. Oh, and he took some crystals. Like, random mineral crystals my brother brought back from a trip to a gem mine. Completely worthless, they were just lying around out there though. And he smashed a light bulb outside. We had a couple baseball bats in the other room too. One of those is now by my bed. Also that window gets locked. Honestly I was not as frightened as I feel like I should have been, looking back. Helps that the dude didn't linger. Plus adrenaline. Weirdly we found a glove sitting on some shit inside, we kept the spare key inside that glove, outside. We had two guesses, maybe he took the gloves to not leave fingerprints, lol like they are gonna fingerprint, and somehow never noticed the key, or he took them because he found the key. And couldn't figure out our shit awful door. The latter seems most likely, but then he took the gloves around to the alley and brought them inside? Who knows? We get people now and then who knock on our door in the middle of the day until someone answers it, and then they are looking for somebody that I've never heard of before. Our place is a small like mother-in-law suite behind another house down a small alley. You don't accidentally end up here, but fuck me if it isn't ripe for messing with. Always makes me wonder if they are just checking it out, if I got lucky being home, jokes on them I have no life, or if they actually think they're at the right place, looking for X, selling her some weed. It didn't wake us up as we were up late, but one time we also had someone shoot our house. Came in, bounced off our washer and was lying on the bathroom floor. The trajectory without the washer was like right at our computer area too. Or hell if we'd been in there dropping a deuce it probably would have gone through our leg. Good old Milwaukee.